William Young was born in Mareeba, not far out of Cairns on the Atherton tableland, and spent most of his life growing up in Dambulla in far north Queensland. This is a self-portrait he took when he returned back to his homeland, back to the area he grew up, having lived in Sydney and carved out an amazing niche for himself as a major photographer working in the gay and celebrity scene in Sydney. And many of those images as well are inscribed in William's hand, sort of in extensio, expanded text about the subject of the work. What's really interesting about this portrait, I think, is that William can hardly be less ready to have a self-portrait taken. He's dressed very casually, hands in pocket, wearing a t-shirt which clearly he collected on a trip to China, and with his photographer's light meter just casually draped around his neck. And yet there's a look of concern and maybe even anxiousness as he looks out toward the camera. And the reason for that is revealed in the narrative that's written in William's hand across the top of the photograph. And I'll just read the first line. I stood in the place where my uncle, William Fang Yuen, had been shot in 1922. The fact that his uncle, who worked on this very cane field, who was shot by the white manager of this very cane farm, they believed very strongly that a great injustice had been done to their uncle. His accused murderer was found completely not guilty by the court in a unanimous decision. And this is something that really stirred up a great deal of anxiety and anger among the Chinese Australian community of that region at the time. William later did a series of images which are specially dedicated to interrogating, as it were, the evidence, the court-based evidence that was presented around that particular crime back in the 1920s. So here he is, having come back from Sydney, having worked with a Chinese teacher in Sydney for a period of time, looking at Taoism, decided as a part of that learning he needed to better understand his own origins and history. And when living as a young boy up in Queensland, he was bullied for being Chinese and was very poorly dealt with, as most of his family were. And his mother wanted to, I suppose, sidestep all of that grief and was very anxious that William and his other siblings assimilated into Australia. Being Chinese, she once said to him, was useless. All that will do is, if you like, get us into trouble. And this is a portrait, a photograph, where William has returned to North Queensland to try and reconcile himself with what must have been one of the most tumultuous periods in his family's history. It must have had a big impact, particularly on his father and his mother. And for William, it was one of those big moments of his life that he felt he wanted to kind of reconstruct simply by returning to the site of the crime. And I think it's an incredibly disarming, a very moving, a very intimate self-portrait, and unquestionably one of the best that we have in our collection.